the draft restriction proposal, actually the registry of intention from the German authorities with regard to BPA. We basically have two parts of an introductory slide deck to bring everybody to the same page with the basically a summary of the content of the registry of intention from the German authorities. Then we will give some more information and also perspective from the EIC's point of view on this registry of intention for the restriction of BPA. And we would then conclude the session with question and answers. I would suggest, probably makes it easier for the flow of conveying the information if you use the chat function of the Cisco WebEx, which you will find at the right bottom of your screen, where you then can basically type in your question, and then we can address these questions after we have ended the presentation part of this conference call. So yeah, welcome everybody. So we would like to provide first some information about what the German authorities have proposed a few weeks ago in their information session about a future restriction on BPA. Just to bring everybody to the same page, I assume that most of you may have attended, but some of you not. So I'll just shortly summarize what was basically discussed in that information session. So just to introduce the two speakers, myself, my name is Gerhard Müller. I'm the head of the product stewardship function at Hexion, and I'm also, of course, as a member, head of the advocacy team within the Epoxy Resins Committee. My co-speaker is Silke Tenbroek, and Silke, if you just want to introduce yourself shortly, so we have covered that part. You're probably on mute.
Unmute. Sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Excuse me. Okay. My name is Silke Tenbroek. I'm working for Olin and as a product stewardship manager, and I'm Olin is member of the Epoxy Resin Committee. I'm also member of the subcommittees and the steering committee, and in this function would like to explain a bit epoxies to you and our interest to provide you information.
Okay, thanks, Silke. So we just have summarized here the authorities' view. What is the rationale for this restriction on bisphenol A and bisphenol A derived products from the authorities' perspective? One of the things which the German Environmental Federal Agency, UBA, has always emphasized is that they consider BPA to be an issue because of its ubiquity in the environment. So you can find bisphenol A in all environmental compartments, especially surface waters. And for them, the main issue is that BPA has been identified under REACH as an endocrine disruptor for the environment. Among other SVAC identifications, as you know, BPA has also been identified as a reprotoxic substance as well as a endocrine disruptor for human health. And as such, it is on the candidate list for authorization under REACH. Now, what, of course, then the objective of the authorities is to significantly reduce or ideally eliminate emissions of BPA to the environment regardless of the source. So what UBA has proposed is that for certain uses of bisphenol A and bisphenol A containing products, a maximum level of 0.02% by weight, so 200 ppm, should be established. for additive uses, for residual levels in articles, as well as for the level in mixtures which are used in non-automated processes. They have also indicated that they are looking at establishing also concentration levels for the service life of articles and subassemblies, and these maximum levels have not been defined yet, and will also to some extent depend on the information which is shared with the authorities now in this informal call for evidence, and as such, that will be, let's say, coming out probably sometime in 2021. What we need to keep in mind is that this restriction process is a separate process from the authorization, which means basically that we have now two regulatory processes running for BPA, this restriction process, which is spearheaded by the German authorities, and then also, in addition, the authorization process. At this point of time, BPA is still on the SVHC candidate list, so it has not been added to the priority list, which would be the starting point for the actual authorization process. So far, we have not seen that there is any further development in that area, so maybe this next move for the authorization process may happen in 2021. So yeah, we mentioned what the main concern use areas for the German authorities are. So one is the residual concentration of BPA in articles, then also concentrations of BPA in mixtures, which are handled in non-automated processes, so in non-closed processes. And then it is also the release of BPA from articles during service life due to stresses, which may be temperature fluctuations, which may be pH, which may be UV radiation, which leads to weathering and degradation of polymers. And due to that degradation, BPA is released from the polymer matrix. If you look at the Q&A document, which is on the German authorities' website, you will see that their main concern is, of course, the additive uses of BPA, because we know that an example of BPA in thermal paper, which is, of course, restricted as of January 2020, so basically banned. But there are still, of course, other applications which use BPA as an additive, because BPA is a very effective and also cheap antioxidant. And as such, these will be applications like some applications in PVC, soft PVC, where BPA is still used as an antioxidant for plasticizer mixtures. This will be definitely one of the main targets of this future restriction. What we should also keep in mind that this first communication from the German authorities is not, let's say, the actual restriction. It is just a very early draft. The actual restriction proposal will be published in October 2021 by the German authorities. And this was basically just an informational session for all stakeholders which use BPA in one way or the other. And that was also then linked to this informal call for evidence, which is an informal process under REACH, so it's not obligatory to be performed by the authorities. And this informal call for evidence basically is seeking information from stakeholders with regard to how is BPA used, at what concentration level. My colleague Silke will give later on some further information about the details of what kind of information the authorities are looking here for. So with regard to industrial users, which are operating in a plant environment, that is not considered to be a main concern because usually then BPA containing mixtures or pre-formulations are used in, let's say, in an automated process, which is usually a closed process, which basically eliminates, let's say, the risk of emissions into the environment. Also in a plant environment, of course, if you would have an accidental spill, there are also procedures and also safeguards to prevent basically these mixtures then containing BPA to get into the environment. So as such, industrial environments are not to be considered a hotspot area of concern, but of course, small, medium enterprises which may probably not be able to adhere to the highest industrial standard, or also professional uses, are considered to be areas of concern and potentially could be a target of a future restriction proposal. Exceptions could be allowed, but will of course make it necessary that either the personnel has a training certificate or that some other form of precaution is taken. The so far undefined area of release during service life, yeah, that is something which we are still waiting for. As I indicated, it may be impacted by submissions from industry or professional stakeholders during this informal call for evidence. They have indicated that they would potentially derive various release rates depending on the type of application and also depending on the stresses to which then an article or a subassembly is exposed to, like for indoor environments with stresses which could be heat, or outdoor environments where we then also have temperature, UV radiation, and also pH, hydrolysis, etc. So to some extent, we know what the potential restriction will encompass. So it will be restricting the use of an additive and also the content in articles to this 0.02% level, which is the same as had been established for the restriction in thermal paper. This restriction will also apply not only to products produced in the European Union, but will also apply to imported products from overseas, and as such will then basically establish that level playing field, both for domestic producers as well as foreign importers. We still have some, let's say, questions about these non-automated processes. We have been in contact with the authorities, but so far they have not further specified what they consider to be an automated process and a non-automated process. And as such, we're still waiting for that. And for the time being, we're basically left to our own interpretation for that. And yeah, as I indicated, releases of BPA from products, articles during service life, that also needs to be further defined. So if we look at the timeline, which is at this point, of course, a tentative, we're talking about the actual draft restriction proposal being published in October 2021. Then, of course, there will be a conformity check. There will be then a 6 months public consultation, as well as an assessment by the REACH expert committees, which is the risk assessment committee, as well as the socioeconomic analysis committee. They will develop their opinions, also basically assessing submissions which will arrive via the public consultation. and then provide their opinion to via ECHA to the EU Commission. And then in 2023, the Commission will develop a restriction proposal for the amendment of Annex 17 within 3 months after receipt of the committee opinions. And then basically we expect that by autumn 2024, there should be a final decision on the restriction proposal, which will most likely be taken through the comitology process. And if that is then agreed on, then this draft proposal becomes basically added to the restriction as a restriction to reach Annex 17. And of course, we would expect that in order then to allow the stakeholders, so the BPA users, to adapt to this restriction, there will be a transition period. And given, let's say, the complexity of the value chains and all the ramifications, I would say 3 years or probably a bit more may be considered as a reasonable period. So this then actual restriction being enforced would then apply as of probably end of 2027 or 2028. Yeah, so this ROI document is not the actual restriction. That will come next year. So far, based on what we have heard, in principle, all uses of BPA, including BPA-derived polymers, are within the scope of that potential future restriction. There will be exemptions are possible, but they will rely on the production of solid sound data. For example, sharing of data regarding accelerated weathering, aging of polymers linked to the release of BPA, for example. But also other information, how polymers are used, how they are processed. This is all information which can substantiate that there is no risk, no concern for a specific application. So any information you share with the authorities is, I think, is valuable because no information sharing means basically that authorities have to default to the worst case scenario as a precautionary approach. So in our view, any information shared is better than sharing no information with the authorities. And Silke, you want to take over, or should I flip the slides for you?
Yeah, just feel free to that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I'd like to continue just to give a little insight into the epoxy chemistry here. That's where the BPA is used. In fact, the majority of epoxy resins is produced using BPA, but starts already with another molecule. BPA is reacted with epichlorohydrin to the bisphenol A diglycidyl ether, or we call that batch, or DGEBA, or simply liquid epoxy resin. This is a highly reactive molecule with the epoxy groups. They can react further with amines, with amides, with anhydrides, and so on, to form the actual final epoxy product. Beside the batch molecule or liquid epoxy resin, there is also solid epoxy resin, which is either BPA batch with further reacted BPA, so a longer chain molecule, or simply BPA with epichlorohydrin that also produces solid epoxy resin. Next slide, please. So as you could imagine from the, there is a certain residual of BPA in LER or SER. And in order to look at that, we made determination each of the ERC members, and we made an average of that and found that the BPA content of the LERs that are produced by ERC members is below 5 ppm. Even a lot of the samples were below the detection limit, below 1 ppm. So the BPA content actually is very low of the LER. Solid epoxy resins have a bit higher BPA content. This is simply due to the polymer process. Solid epoxy resins are polymers, so the BPA is a bit less mobile during the production. Hence, there's some residue in the SERs. That depends a lot on the molecular weight. Higher SERs have higher contents, lower have lower. We again made an average amongst the ERC members and found the average BPA content of our SERs is around 65 ppm. There are some SERs with high molecular weights that contain more BPA, also more than this 200 ppm limit that was proposed by UBA. But the effect, there's a very limited number of articles that should be affected by these this SERs exceeding the limit, because the BPA is also getting further in the process to the final epoxy product. Next slide, please. So epoxy products or batch or SERs are further reacted, as I said, with a curing agent, with a hardener, into the final products. And this is not a promotion session for epoxy. Of course, we are talking about other subjects here, but still saying the epoxy products are vital for societies. So there is a large number of applications for epoxy products, also in view of green energy savings. For example, they are vital for the wind blade production, the actual composites that provide the stability, coatings, adhesives for solar panels, for fiber composites for electrical cars. They are also essential for further future products, such as electrical laminates used in all this digitalization that is to come. Coatings, adhesives for aerospace and automotive industry. Well known is the use as food preservation as can coaters in pipe repair and in construction. And this is because of their unique properties. They are very chemical resistant. They are very good in corrosion protection. They have very good battering properties. But if you're a downstream user, you know about these properties. So epoxy products are actually really beneficial and vital for society, so needs to remain. Next slide, please. So this further polymerization to the final epoxy product is a polymer that is a thermoset polymer, not a thermoplastic polymer. Thermoplastics can be thermally disassembled, which is not possible with thermosets in general. This polymerization provides a highly crossing three-dimensional polymer network, which is not easy to degrade. I mean, some of the concerns that the UBA has, that is polymer degradation, a BPA release from polymer degradation, but this is not easy with epoxies due to the type of polymers they form. Next slide, please. And so we come now further to the call for evidence. Gerd Müller already mentioned that. This is what we would like also to talk with you about as a downstream user and ask you to provide information. This process is not part of the regular regulatory process, but it's a bit of an exception. We have the impression that UBA is still a bit lacking of information to propose proportionate restriction. Proportionate in the sense of hazard and risk, in the sense of socioeconomic costs and benefits, and availability of alternatives. Therefore, they are asking stakeholders for more information, also to provide information to RAC and SEAC for their opinion making, and also for derogations. So derogations must be justified with robust information. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, and this call for evidence, they put this in 3 pillars, and those of you who have attended the information session have seen that slide. So they are looking for information in particular concerning hazard and risk, which is a description of uses, quantities used, but also data on market share, relevance of products as such, but also relevance of exports. They are looking for more information concerning the costs, especially for the SEAC, the Socio-Economic Committee, information on economic impact as such, on investment needs also for substitution, transition periods for substitution, but also for risks that, for example, a production is moved outside Europe if restrictions or prohibitions are set in Europe. And they are looking for information on alternatives, available alternatives, but also maybe the non-possibility of actually substituting the product. And said before, derogation in particular, if a derogation should be made, it's made on the use, not for the user. For the user, that would be the authorization process. Here we are talking about the restriction for everything. So derogations could be given for users, but to provide a derogation, to give a derogation, detailed information is needed on emissions, on costs, on availability of alternatives, and others to really grant a derogation for the restriction. Next slide, please. So, of course, the Epoxy Resin Committee already did a lot. We engaged with UBA already prior to this announcement. In fact, a couple of years prior to that, because the such is not coming as a surprise. It was announced that UBA wants to propose a restriction, but it was never clear when, and we were now indeed a bit kept by surprise that this is now coming out now, because there was even a project launched by UBA requesting further information. We have launched a project to provide further information, but this all takes some time. So what we've done so far and what we've provided to UBA, or are in the process of providing, is information that the ERC and other associations generated. We recently generated some data on accelerated aging of epoxy product with the aim of simulating landfill. This is information still to provide to UBA. Then we have generated in the past and are in the process of updating that a so-called flow path pathway flow analysis that is a prediction of potential BPA releases into the environment, especially into the water. That was done for Germany. And that shows that from the calculation, only less than 1% actually of releases to the environment come from epoxy products. There are much bigger sources for releases to the environment, which is a lot of that is coming from thermal paper, where BPA was used as an additive, which is now prohibited. But a lot of the thermal paper, for example, is used still in toilet paper and other recycling papers. So there is some BPA coming from there and from other sources. As I said before, we did this round robin test series to provide information on the actual BPA content of resins. And provided that, and also a couple of years ago, we've done so-called white papers where we made also calculations of potential releases from epoxy resin applications. So UBA is aware of all that, or is to be given the information. Besides that, we have launched another project with the German BAM, the Bundesanstalt für Materialwirtschaft, or Federal Institute for Material Testing, that should also provide information on releases during service life, so during use of products. And This should also give some more information on potential degradation, if any. I mean, what we know is that degradation, if any degradation can take place, this will be under UV conditions. That's also why epoxy products usually are not used outdoors. Under UV are usually protected by top coats if they are used outdoors, or in indoor or protected applications. But we are investigating that, especially with an independent institute here, also under worst case conditions, to have a reference what happens under UV, even though this is not the case really. This project takes some time because this aging as such takes some time, and we expect some information by end of 2021 and so on. And we also gave that information to UBA that we are doing this test, but still UBA is launching this proposal now or in the coming year already. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's especially why input from downstream users or other parties is needed here. So as said, the Epoxy Resin Committee has provided information. As a producer of the resins, we are further upstream, if you like. We have only limited information on the final products. Downstream users might have readily available information already, and downstream users' inputs are most valuable for the authorities since they are much closer to the end users than we are. So we really ask you for your input. Next slide, please. So what kind of input could be useful? So data on relevance and not relevance uses of additives. So one of the requests is to prohibit additive use for BPA. This is something that the Epoxy Resin Committee also supports. We see that uses as additives for BPA have no future, and we would support that. We are in the process or have phased out respective uses already. And if downstream users could help here to provide data that this is already the case, that would be helpful. Any information on that on leaching or leaching not that leaching of BPA is not relevant from articles would be also helpful, which could be maybe R&D testing of potential leachage over years, or accelerated aging tests. Very helpful could also be migration data from food contact, so from can coating in particular. We have had discussions with the UBA, and even though migration test data are information that are provided to, for example, European authorities, UBA does not necessarily have this information. So this could be helpful to also show that the release of BPA from food contact application or toys is below the limit. Any release from articles, of course, is helpful. Any further information that provides or illustrates that epoxy resin polymers protected, which they usually are with top coats, do not release BPA, would also be helpful. Any information on BPA in residues in polymer could be of help. And further arguments that polymers are essential, cannot easily be substituted. As said before, any kind of socioeconomic data that also underlines that would be very helpful. And also to say, if you have data not yet available but intend to generate any of these data and cannot provide that by the end of the year, that's the final, or 15th of January, the final date of this call for evidence. There will be a further possibility, usually as the proposal comes out, so latest by October next year. After that, there's usually a 6-month public consultation period where information can be provided still. Even though we we kind of urge you to, if you have information, to provide it now in the call of evidence, because now we are in the stage where the proposal is actually shaped. And when it's once out, there is usually less changes or there's a limit of intervention at that point in time, even though it can be still done, but now it's better, say. Okay, maybe next slide.
Sure.
Yeah, just so as we said, I mean, any downstream user or other companies of interest, we really would ask you to participate to this call for evidence. There's a link in this presentation. The information will be provided after. Provide your information, specify any derogations if you request any, and we can help with further information or shaping or whatever you would like. If you want us to do something, let us know, please. And again, said the deadline for participation in this call for evidence is the 15th of January. We see that the timeline is a bit strict, especially with Christmas coming up and usually vacation period. But yeah, it is as it is. And yeah, if you can provide information until then, very much appreciated. So thanks very much. And now I would open for any questions that you might have and that you might want to discuss here